This is the easiest money you're ever going to make. In your line of work, that's a godsend. I stared at the generic, nameless suit standing in front of me. He claimed that he worked for the CIA, even flashed his little badge and all. Didn't matter to me whether or not I believed him. The only thing that mattered was the fact that he paid half up front, promising the other half after the job was done. A part of a freelance mercenary group, modern-day soldiers of fortune. We've been hired by government agencies before, but mostly just ones in Africa and Southeast Asia. You can imagine the type of shit we've been asked to pull off. Safe to say ethics aren't our primary concern. While not blatantly immoral, if somebody offered us an exorbitant amount to oversee security for a human trafficking ring, I'd shoot him on the spot. And that's not to say that we're good people. It's far from it. In fact, I don't expect you to feel sympathy for me. I just want to get my story out there. Something very strange is going on. Something we should probably all be worried about. The mission itself was presented as a simple one, but the circumstances surrounding it were more unusual. We're staging a raid on a fanatical religious cult in Montana, a real psychotic bunch, I remember the suit telling me. I couldn't have imagined a better compensation than the one he was offering, so I listened intently. In all honesty, it was nearly enough to set my entire team up for retirement. Nevertheless, the whole situation unnerved me. We were caught completely off guard when they contacted us. Somehow they'd found our email address on the dark web. I knew what we were doing was illegal, but they didn't seem to care. In fact, they never mentioned anything about our past crimes at all. In reality, they probably could have smoked us at any point. Didn't make a lot of sense why they chose not to, or why they chose to approach us at all. I had my hunches, of course. Most of them to do with the fact that we were entirely expendable and operated under the radar the best we could. Obviously, we didn't do a good enough job. Whatever. It is what it is. We needed this payday. Our little operation couldn't last forever. I know it's not important for the job, but what's the purpose of the raid? These guys growing weed or something? I asked. The question came out snarkier than I intended it to. The suit just grinned. I guess he had a sense of humor. Well, he began, I doubt you'll be telling anybody, so I suppose you might as well know. He seemed confident in that assumption. Maybe a little too much so. These people stumbled upon something that they shouldn't have, he continued. And then, they tried to hide it. Better not be something that's moments away from exploding, I said. The suit laughed this time. It's not so simple. What do you know about the existence of extraterrestrial life? I raised my eyebrows. The hell was he about to tell me? You're asking me if I believe in aliens? I responded. I took a second to consider it. Sure, why not? He went on to explain the real objective. Sounded absurd, but it was also coming from a horse's mouth. You tell me what I'm supposed to believe. Apparently, a UFO had crashed on a farm in southeastern Montana a few days prior. As luck would have it, this farm belonged to the Church of Blissful Ascension, the cult in question. Shortly after it landed, some cult members stumbled upon it, subsequently being ordered to drag it into the leader's farmhouse, which was quite literally a mansion. Not much was known about the leader, other than his epithet, which was the Divine Messenger. Yeah, that kind of guy. In reality, the cult was just a front for the trafficking of various goods, which had brainwashed its members into doing a lot of the dirty work. The most interesting part about this was the UFO itself. It was allegedly about 12 feet wide, 3 feet in diameter, and shaped like a pill. Before it landed, it had been moving erratically, seemingly teleporting short distances every few seconds or so. After it landed, some kind of dark green fluid began leaking out of it. Now for the actual mission. We simply had to go in and assist a team of SAC agents in wiping out every single member. No survivors. No witnesses. No exceptions. What the CIA planned to do with the UFO afterwards was none of our business. Not that I really wanted to know. We didn't have much time to prepare for the raid, but it didn't sound like we needed it. We were dealing with amateurs, most likely just trigger-happy rednecks who couldn't strategize or aim for shit. I suppose raid wasn't the most apt way to describe the job. It seemed more like a slaughter than anything else. My team of 6 met up with the SAC, also 6, at a small underground complex used by the CIA for clandestine operations, located about 30 minutes away from the farm. There we geared up, went over tactics, and were told to repeat the objective at hand. No witnesses, no survivors. After all that was said and done, we piled into a SWAT truck and drove off. And we'd never worked with the CIA in the past, so we supposed that this was standard procedure. We suited up in black tactical gear, provided by the agents themselves. This part was a bit odd to me. We had our own gear, stuff we'd been using for the longest time. Both sets were nearly identical, but the agents still insisted that we use theirs. The atmosphere in the truck was also disconcerting. Maybe it was just in my head. But everybody seemed so stiff. The agents clutching their rifles with iron grips while staring blankly ahead. My team tried talking amongst themselves, but every word just felt awkward. I just chalked it up to the nerves, which didn't make any sense because I'd never felt nerves like that before. After what felt like hours, we finally arrived, stopping some odd yards away from the farmhouse in order to remain undetected. We piled out, got into formation, and began. I was assigned the furthest flank position, so I stayed back as everybody else moved ahead. The closest people in front of me were one of my guys and an agent. It didn't take long for the strangeness to amplify. I noticed that the agent was gradually moving slower and slower. Eventually, I caught up to him. Well, it was more like I was forced to catch up. If I'd been moving any slower, I would have stopped. This agent had ruined the entire formation without anybody at all in front noticing. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, as I walked up beside him. Without answering my question, he handed me a small scrap of paper. I took a quick glance at it, seeing an address and a date and time written on it. "No, meet me, don't be late." No inflection at all in his voice. "Do whatever you can to stay alive." As soon as he finished saying this, he sped up, reclaiming his original position. Now, obviously, that interaction was a cause for concern. I had to start wondering just what the hell I'd gotten my team into. I seriously started considering calling it off right then and there, but before I knew it, bullets were flying. The agents at the front had taken out the 2 guards standing at the front entrance. Soon after, we blew the door down and stormed inside. The agents shot down a few more guards stationed at the main floor before we started heading towards the basement. Once we got down there, 10 more guards, cult members, were waiting for us. As per the mission, I raised my rifle and prepared to fire. But unfortunately, I couldn't prepare myself for what happened next. The agent at the front raised his fist, signaling for us to stop. Surprisingly, the guards didn't shoot at us. In fact, they didn't even react. The agent began turning around before aiming their rifles at us instead. "There's been a change of plans." We'd been set up. That much was obvious. I didn't even have time to curse before the shit went off the rails. I ducked, feverishly trying to avoid point-blank gunfire while firing off nearly blind retaliatory shots. I managed to stumble my way behind some cover, but not before having 2 bullets graze my cheek and thigh. I peeked out, seeing the cult guards with malicious grins across their faces, also shooting at my team, and my team only. Amidst the chaos, I could see Faisal, one of my men, rush an agent in an attempt to take him down to the ground. It was definitely a desperation move, but despite Faisal being substantially larger than the agent, his takedown was stuffed, and he subsequently thrown into a pillar. I could feel rage washing over me. I raised my rifle, aimed at the agent's head, and fired. He didn't go down. My aim wasn't the issue. I could see the bullets drilling into the side of his helmet. The guy even flinched. But he didn't fall. Instead, he finished Faisal with a shot to the head and walked off. My mouth fell agape as I started backing up. I guess I was pretty rattled because I stopped paying attention to my surroundings. I felt myself bump into somebody before spinning around to see another agent staring down at me. I thought about going for my knife, but before I could even make a move, the agent grabbed my arm and effortlessly judo slammed me into the floor. I'd been thrown before, but this was by far the worst pain I'd ever experienced. I felt like I was being tossed by a gorilla, not by a man with a similar build to me. His strength was ridiculous. Once on the ground, he mounted me before raising a fist. I knew with every fiber of my being that a single punch would pulverize my entire skull, so I started preparing my soul for the afterlife. The agent hesitated. "Play dead," he whispered, his voice a familiar one. He slammed his fist down inches from my head and cracked the floor beneath me before flipping me face down. "Don't move no matter what happens," he said again, the pressure blanketing my body soon disappearing. The agent was getting up. I knew what he said. I didn't want to listen. I wanted to help my team. I got them into this mess, so I was obligated to get them out. But I didn't move. I knew it was useless. The basement had gotten quiet. No more sounds of my struggle. My team was dead, and it was entirely my fault. Moments later, somebody began talking, snapping me out of my self-pity session. "Geez, job well done, huh?" Didn't sound like one of the agents, so I assumed the voice belonged to a cult member. The hell was going on, I thought to myself. Were they working together? "Now about the payment." This question was interrupted by gunfire. A brief bout of additional chaos followed with more bodies dropped to the floor. I counted about 10 in total. I guess they weren't working together after all. "All right, let's make this quick," one of the agents said. I had to wonder what he was talking about. What more did they need to do? I listened to the sounds of scuffling boots, and agents went about doing something. I opened one of my eyes just a sliver, trying to make out what the hell was going on. I wish I'd just kept it closed. I was lying right next to Ricardo, one of my teammates. As I stared at his lifeless, bullet-ridden body, I wanted to scream. I forced myself to keep my mouth shut. I continued watching as the agents went around to every single body, both my team and the cult members, and injected some kind of dark green fluid into their veins. Soon enough, they got to me. I held my breath and I laid stiff as I felt the needle go into my arm. Thankfully, the guy didn't check my pulse. I was losing my fucking mind at this point, not just because I was playing dead while some mystery fluid was being mixed into my bloodstream. It was a whole damn situation. If this hadn't been the worst day of my life, then it certainly was a contender. Afterwards, I heard the agents mumbling to each other. I couldn't make out much, but I did hear 12 hours being said quite a lot. 12 hours. 12 hours to what? After about 15 more minutes, the agents finally left. I laid still for some time after that. I wasn't exactly looking forward to seeing what the agents had left behind. But I wouldn't be able to get to the bottom of this by wasting my time mourning. My entire body was in pain as I pulled myself up, trying not to look at the massacre around me. I took out the piece of paper the one agent had given me. The address belonged to a motel in Billings. Well, the meeting time was in 10 hours. I stripped off all my gear, made myself look as presentable as I possibly could before getting the hell out of that farmhouse and trying to hitch a ride on a nearby road. A couple of hours and $200 later, somebody finally agreed to give me a ride. Luckily, Billings isn't too far away from the farm, so I think I'll be able to get to the motel on time. However, I'm not so sure that I'm going to like whatever's waiting for me there. Making it to Billings took me longer than I'd expected it to. As it turns out, hitchhiking on a remote road during the middle of the night isn't the safest thing you could do. Go figure, huh? It was fine, though. Nothing I couldn't handle. With that said, my real problem was still ahead of me. I didn't quite remember what the agent who'd slipped me the paper looked like. When we met up, they were all already wearing gear. He was definitely white, though. About 6 feet tall, fairly muscular build, shouldn't be too difficult to spot. The paper also specified that he'd be in the lobby, so that's where I headed once I found the motel. Once in, I looked around. The place was nearly empty. with only 4 people sitting around. An older couple, a single woman and a single man. He was white, tall, probably in his 30s. Most likely who I was looking for. "Tell me you're the guy I'm looking for," I said, approaching him. The man looked up at me, as his expression morphed into one of confusion. He shook his head. "I think you're mistaken, sir. I don't know what you mean." I muttered out something along the lines of, "My bad," before getting ready to walk away. But before I could, the man started chuckling. "Yeah, this is the guy." "You look so worried there," he said in between laughs. "Jesus, it's funny." Safe to say, I was starting to get pissed off. "What the fuck is going on?" I asked. The agent wiped a tear from his eye as he calmed down before checking the time. 20 minutes left, he said. It was pretty obvious what he was talking about. Had it really been close to 12 hours? The hell's gonna happen in 20 minutes? The man grabbed his jacket up and got up. "Nothing good. Follow me." "Follow you to where?" "I'll kick your fucking ass if you don't tell me what's going on right now," I said, anger rising in my voice. "Right here? In the lobby?" "It's a bad idea." "Come to my room and do it there instead," he responded. Before I could say anything else, he was already walking up the stairs. I followed close behind, nearly fuming at how shady he was acting. Once he opened up the door to his room, I couldn't help but stop myself from lunging in and grabbing his throat. He didn't fight back, but at the same time, it didn't seem like he needed to. His neck inexplicably felt like a thick steel pipe. And the harder I gripped, the harder it hurt my hand, and soon enough, I just let go. I stepped back, a dumbfounded expression on my face. The agent checked the time again. "You done now?" I didn't respond. He grabbed the bottle of whiskey from the mini fridge and poured out 2 big glasses, sliding me one while downing his at the same time. "I'd recommend you drink that quick," he said. I took a deep breath, calmed myself down. "What did you inject me with? What's going to happen to me?" I asked. "Well, you're going to find out if you keep asking questions," he said. "And trust me, you really don't want to fucking find out." He opened up the closet and unlocked the safe inside. He took out a briefcase, flipped it open to reveal 4 syringes. This time they were filled with a blue liquid. "Drink up," he said, gesturing toward the liquor. "'Cause this is gonna hurt." "If you think I'll let you inject me with something else, you're a fucking idiot. Tell me what the hell is going on right now," I responded. He laughed obnoxiously. "You're calling me an idiot? The same guy who put enough trust in the government to take one of the most blatant, sketchy jobs of all time is calling me an idiot. That's rich. You guys should have jumped out of that fucking truck when you had the chance." I considered responding, but bit my tongue instead. I really couldn't argue against that. It certainly wasn't my brightest moment. "Doesn't fucking matter," I finally said. "You still need to tell me what's going on." "Trust me, I will. But you need this first," he said, holding up one of the syringes. I shook my head. "No, what I need first is an explanation." The agent sighed, checking the time once again. 10 minutes, he said. "You really want to make this more painful than it needs to be?" I guess so. I wasn't budging. Again, not one of my brightest moments. The man shrugged, sitting back in his chair. "So be it. We'll wait." The stern, confident face I was putting on certainly didn't reflect how I was actually feeling at that moment. The agent had a stranglehold on me in just about every conceivable aspect. I hated that fact. I never could accept people having power over me. If I were a smarter man, I would have just listened. But here we are. 10 minutes passed and nothing happened. I nearly breathed a sigh of relief until I felt my arm starting to itch. I scratched at it, only to feel my finger quite literally digging into my flesh. I looked down and nearly choked. It looked like my skin was rotting away, and it was spreading fast. "So," the agent said, holding up the syringe, "you want it now?" "Fuck it," I spat, catching it as he tossed it to me. The pain was starting to become unbearable. I stuck the needle into my vein and pumped the mystery liquid into my bloodstream. At that point, the rot had completely consumed my forearm. It was horrifyingly disgusting to look at. In my mind, there was no fate worse than that shit spreading to the rest of my body. That's rapid necrosis right there, the agent said. And you just injected the antidote. I felt immense relief immediately after. I watched as the rot slowly crept back down my arm before disappearing completely. In that moment, a wave of euphoria washed over me. I've never had heroin, but I imagine the sensation would be comparable. Enjoy the feeling, the agent continued, because the hard part's coming up. I didn't have to ask what he meant by that. It was as if a flip had suddenly switched. The euphoria was immediately replaced with the most excruciating pain I'd ever experienced in my entire life. Even worse than when the rot was consuming my arm. That's why I made you the drink, the agent went on. The pain will only last 10 minutes. Try and keep it down, though. We don't need any noise complaints. Those 10 minutes seemed like 20 hours. If you were to ask me exactly what I was feeling, I would have had a hard time describing it. Hell, simply put, it was hell. As if every molecule in my body was being tossed into an industrial meat grinder before the remnants were dropped into molten lava. I laid on the ground for a few moments after it had passed. To tell you the truth, I wanted to lay there for a lot longer. Then I remembered where I was. I leapt up, rushing back at the agent. If I was pissed before, I was about to explode now. What the fuck was that? I screamed in his face as I began trying to strangle him again. It was strange. His throat didn't feel like metal anymore. It felt like regular flesh. I could even see his face starting to turn red. I grinned. I was finally getting the upper hand. It seemed like the antidote had more than a few side effects. But that didn't last long. He grabbed my arm and elbowed me in the face before somehow managing to reverse our positions and mount me. And from there, he put me in an arm lock. All right, he said. You got that out of your system? Can I explain to you what the fuck is happening now? I tapped the floor, signaling yes. All right, he said, letting me go. We could finally make some progress. He pulled up a chair and sat down. Still panting from our short grapple match, I did the same. Why'd you kill my team? I asked. If we told anybody about the UFO, nobody would ever fucking believe us. Why'd you hire us in the first place? Slow down, he said. One question at a time. First thing you need to know is... He paused for a moment, almost as if an uncomfortable thought had just crossed his mind. There was no UFO crash. No aliens. That was all fake. I buried my face in my hands, trying to wrap my head around what the hell he just said. What? Before I continue, you want that drink now? He asked. I nodded. Seemed like I was gonna need it. If there was no UFO, then what was the point of the raid? Simple, the agent said. To make it look like there was one. I'm not sure why I nodded. It's not like I understood what was going on in the slightest. Think about it, the agent continued. The CIA conducts a clandestine operation that involves covering up a UFO landing. It goes horribly wrong and all the agents die. The agents, I said. My team were the ones that died. The agent nodded. Yeah. And what uniforms were you wearing? I thought back. Suddenly, it made complete sense why they didn't want us wearing our own uniforms. SAC gear, I responded. But it still doesn't make any sense. Every agent should have been registered, right? We sure as hell weren't. That's right, the agent responded. But it doesn't matter. He gestured toward an empty syringe sitting on the table. Once the necrosis finishes, there wouldn't have been nothing but bones left. Nothing left to try and identify. It's a real nasty concoction. Fair enough, I said. So the CIA backs a raid in order to conceal a potential UFO crash. The mission ends in disaster and everybody, including the cult members, die in an inexplicable way. The agent nods. The aftermath yields a burning question. Who, or what, killed them? I sat back. The implication seemed ridiculous. I mean, it was comical. The aliens. The aliens liquefied everybody and escaped out into the world, I responded. The agent smirked. Now you're getting it. I don't think I am, I responded. How do hostile aliens running amok benefit the CIA in any capacity? The agent poured himself some more liquor. That part, I'll admit, it's a bit complicated. And complicated it was. This is where his story veers off batshit territory. According to him, this whole debacle started years prior, with one man at the center of it all. Jonas Kane. To the best of everyone's knowledge, Kane was just a civilian, not a former SEAL, Ranger, or anything to that effect. In the span of just 2 months, he managed to gain the favor of a sizable portion of the higher-ups at the CIA, effectively splitting the organization into factions. Didn't take long for his side to start overwhelming the others, stating that he essentially held the CIA in the palm of his hand. That wouldn't have been a stretch. So how does a regular guy manage to do all this? Well, the why to that question was pretty obvious. The how was another story entirely. The antidote, the agent said, holding up another one of the blue syringes. I couldn't tell you the scientific name, so we just call it the God Serum. Kane's claim to fame. I half scoffed, half chuckled. Read a lot of comics, huh? Still a teenager at heart, he said. That's just my coping mechanism for all the atrocities I've committed, though. I couldn't tell if that was a joke or not. So Kane developed the serum. By himself? The agent nodded. That's the way it seems. Well, what does it do exactly? Despite how dumb I thought the name was, it wasn't terribly inaccurate. On top of immediately healing any injury or disease like necrosis, the user essentially ascended into a superhuman state. How strong somebody could become depended on their own genetics. Their base physical attributes could be enhanced 20-fold, at the minimum, all the way to a staggering 55. Slow twitch muscle strength, striking power, speed, endurance, durability, you name it. It was the super soldier serum on additional steroids, and from what they've seen so far, there haven't been any discernible negative side effects. Kane was also the only one who knew how to make it, and he wasn't sharing his secrets. This gave him a stranglehold on just about the entire organization. Can't the CIA just force the recipe out of him? I asked. You know, advanced torture techniques or something. That's an option, yeah, the agent responded. But easier said than done. The upper limit of 55-fold enhancements only applies to the serum that he's giving us. Kane's different from the rest of us. He's on something else entirely. What I'm trying to say is, he's unstoppable, uncontrollable. Machine guns, snipers, explosive tranquilizers, nothing do shit to him. If we're Captain America, then he's fucking Superman. No one can force him to do anything. I shook my head. This sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Are you hearing yourself? I don't disagree, but as absurd as it sounds, it's the fucking truth. And isn't that what you wanted to know? The truth? The agent responded. Anyway, that's the how of the whole story. Kane wasn't a scientist either. Up until 2018, he was registered as a traffic court lawyer in Oklahoma. We don't know how the fuck he managed to do any of this. But the worst thing about this whole situation is that we don't even know what he's trying to do, what his end game is. The agent stood up, lit a cigarette, and began pacing. But it sure as hell probably isn't anything good, he said. Combine this with the fact that he's got most of the CIA wrapped around his thumb, and we have a disaster on our hands. He's gaining more and more influence by the day. If he continues to go unchecked, well, you get it, don't you? The agent was telling the truth. And this was indeed a nightmare scenario. Evil Superman as world dictator, forcing the world to believe that we were being attacked by aliens for unknown reasons. What a bright future. So, what are you then? I asked. Leader of the anti-Kane faction or something? Not the leader, he said, shaking his head. Just one of many moles inside Kane's faction, but we all have the same goal. I'll do anything to take him down. Well, I said, standing up. Sounds like you've got your work cut out for you. Good luck. I'll be heading out now. I knew he probably wasn't going to just let me leave. I could tell that he was trying to recruit me for something from the get-go. But after hearing all this, on top of my entire team being killed, I nearly forgot about that. My team's dead, you know? I said, giving him a death stare. And you caused it. And I don't care if you're a double agent or what, but how the hell am I supposed to forgive that? I'm not asking you to forgive me, the agent responded. But this is bigger than either of us. Bigger than anything you could imagine. If Kane gets his way, I reckon your team would have been fucked regardless. But you don't have to forgive me. All I'm asking is that you work with me for now. If we succeed, then I don't give a fuck what happens next. You can strangle me in my sleep for all I care. He began stepping towards me. If you want your revenge, you can have it. But there might not be a world for you to come back to. He extended his arm, implying that I shake his hand in agreement. Come on. You never dreamed about playing the hero when you were a kid? Might be your only chance. I swatted his hand away. What the hell do you want from me anyway? I responded. I can't even stop my team from dying. What good am I going to be to you? It finally came out. I didn't blame the agent. I really only had myself to blame. A tough pill to swallow for sure. The agent paused for a moment. I couldn't even look him in the eye at this point. I knew he'd be able to see the weakness behind my own. Eventually, he held out his arm again. If I thought you weren't worth recruiting, why the hell am I trying so hard? He asked. Come on. Make the death of your team worth something. I'm still not shaking your hand. Tell me your plan. You guys have a plan, right? The agent grinned. Well, it's a work in progress. It's what? Instead of responding, he tossed me a jacket. I knew you'd say yes. Buttle up now. We're headed to Russia. I've only been to Russia a few times before. There's one solid conclusion I can draw about the country. It's one of the hardest places to complete contracts. The targets are usually hell to put down, and my heart feels like it's seconds away from detonating at all times. I do enjoy drinking over there, though. I managed to get some sleep on the flight over. That would have been impossible had I not been tired to the point of delusion. Our ride came in the form of a clunky old cargo plane that only had sitting space for the pilots. I think I banged my head on about 15 crates before I woke up. There's no flights to Norlix. I can't really take a government-owned aircraft without arousing suspicion, so I had to call in a favor from an old friend, the agent explained. I'm sure you could see the trepidation on my face. Look, it's the best I could do. I suppose it doesn't matter. Plane wasn't the biggest issue. It was what we were bound to see once we got off that worried me the most. Along with the agent and the pilots, there were two others in the plane with us, another SIC agent named Armin, and a Green Beret named Luke. 4 wasn't exactly the biggest team, but the agent assured me that we'd rendezvous with the rest once we got to our destination. The flight was mostly silent, and a bit awkward. So what do I call you? I asked the agent in an attempt to make small talk. You don't have to tell me your real name, just give me something so it doesn't get weird. The agent leaned his head back, as if he were thinking about it. It's Colt. It's my real name, by the way. I trust you enough. He flashed a corny grin at me. I nodded in response. Colt it is. We landed on a small airstrip in the middle of what looked like a remote field. I was hit with freezing rain the moment I stepped out of the plane, which managed to wake me up a bit. I looked around, but there was quite literally nothing surrounding us. You sure we're in the right place? Luke asked. Doesn't look like there's much going on here. Colt looked at one of the pilots, an older, wiry-looking gentleman, and nodded. The man lumbered out of the plane and began walking towards a nearby forest. This way, the man said. It's just a short walk. I underestimated what he meant by short. We walked for about 3 hours into the middle of the forest, all while lugging around 20 pounds of gear and being drenched in the ice-cold precipitation. At one point, we came across some kind of large, pill-shaped object stuck in the trees. It'll make sense later, Colt said when he saw me looking up at it. Just keep walking for now. After the arduous hike, the pilot finally stopped in a clearing and took out a metal detector. He scanned the ground for a bit before gesturing for the shovel that Colt was holding. After about a minute of digging, he uncovered something that looked like the entrance to a vault. Still there, he said, chuckling. Many bad memories here. He entered a code into the keypad, and it opened, revealing a metal ladder leading down into oblivion. He took a deep breath as he got up, before putting his hand on Colt's shoulder. I'll be waiting in the plane. Good luck, my friend. Colt nodded. 6 p.m. If we're not back by then, just leave. The pilot gave him one last glance before walking out of the clearing and out of sight. Didn't look so confident. Well, Colt said, turning on his helmet flashlight. Time to enter the belly of the beast. I couldn't tell you how long the climb down was. I just knew that my arms were jelly by the end. There was also an indescribable smell lingering in the air. It wasn't putrid, per se. It just felt like something I wasn't supposed to be breathing in. After scaling down the ladder, we found ourselves in some kind of underground military complex. It's an old KGB base, Colt explained. Repurposed for modern-day Spetsnaz training. Spetsnaz? I asked. Is that a good idea to show up unannounced? Colt looked down at his watch. If everything's gone according to plan, then we should be fine. Well, how can I not be confident when you put it like that? I muttered. He started moving, and we followed, passing through rooms that contained weightlifting equipment, shooting ranges, and mats for hand-to-hand training. Eventually, we came across the dining hall. I'll admit, I was a bit taken aback by what we found waiting for us. What the hell happened here? Luke asked. It was a bloodbath. Standing amongst the plates of spilt food and drink, there were about 20 soldiers and agents, with 5 more dead on the ground. I'd recognized roughly half as Spetsnaz, but the other half wearing generic tactical gear. I assumed the latter half were our guys. The ones who were dead were all Spetsnaz. Oh, jeez, Colt muttered, as he stared at the grisly scene around him. One of the non-Spetsnaz soldiers looked over at us. He was average height and incredibly handsome, save for the gnarly scar running through one of his eyes. The hell did you expect? He said. We're lucky it only got this bad. Saying that everybody looked on edge would have been an understatement. You showed them what the serum could do, and they still didn't believe you? Colt said, stepping forward. Most did. Not all. We should have expected that from the start. Well, do they believe you now? The soldier looked over his shoulder at the group of angry Spetsnaz behind him. He nodded at them. A few nodded back, and a few cursed at him in Russian. I mean, I guess. They've stopped trying to kill us, at least, so we stopped killing them. Colt sighed, shook his head. Fuck's sake, Visor, he muttered, before gesturing to Luke, Armin, and I. In any case, these are the new guys, all quite capable, if I do say so myself. They're on the serum. The soldier, whose name was apparently Visor, asked. Colt nodded. The soldier walked forward and extended his arm, shaking each of our hands in quick succession. Like Colt mentioned, the name's Visor, he said. I'm glad you guys chose to be part of this. We need all the help we can get. He went on to fill us in on what was happening. Similar to Colt, Visor was an SAC agent acting as a mole inside of Kane's faction. After some lingering, he became privy to the time and location of Kane's second attack. The first one was in the US at a cult base. The second, in Russia, at a Spetsnaz complex. The Russian government was led to believe that aliens had landed on Earth and subsequently slaughtered an entire unit of their soldiers. Kane's plan to make the world believe they were in imminent danger would become one step closer to a reality. So the object in the forest, I said. That's supposed to be the UFO, isn't it? It was planted there. Visor nodded. Can't be more correct. The man's running an intricate operation, which is why we've got to put a wrench into it as fast and as hard as we can. So what happens next? Luke asked. In about an hour, Kane's forces are going to storm the place, Visor responded. They're going to do the same thing they did at your team, Colt added. Have his super soldiers kill all the Spetsnaz and then inject them with a neurotic agent. The deadly aliens strike again, and nobody's safe, not even some of the most skilled soldiers in the world. The U.S. government will eventually find out and compare the incident to what happened in Montana, Visor continued. And it's going to keep happening all around the world. until there's only one conclusion left to draw. We tried explaining the situation, another non-Spetsnaz soldier added, but like hell they were going to believe us. Our Russian's also pretty rusty. I think some things got lost in translation. We believe you now, one of the Spetsnaz said in English, stepping forward, but only for now. If what you're saying does not happen, his face suddenly morphed into a vicious sneer, well, you've killed 5 of my men. I don't care what drugs you've been taking. To become so strong, we will fight back. I found one of the Spetsnaz in the back shout something to the effect of, and you couldn't bring any for us? Sounds good, Chief, Visor replied, ignoring the outburst. But I promise you, we're saving lives here. The Russian soldier didn't seem impressed. Nevertheless, he stepped back for the time being. So from what it sounds like, they won't be expecting us, right? Karman asked. I think it would be the first time I'd ever heard him speak. Visor nodded affirmingly. Good, Karman responded. Makes our job simpler. What's the size of the force coming for us? I asked. That's something I can't confirm, Visor responded. But we've got 12 guys on the serum here. We should be fine. I nearly forgot about that. The enemy was superhuman, but so were we. So what are these? I asked, holding up my rifle. Decorations? Visor grinned. We're going old school, baby. He rolled up his sleeves, showed off his wrapped wrists. I hope you've kept up with your hand-to-hand training. The rest of the soldiers followed suit, dropping their weapons and beginning to stretch out their limbs. There's a reason I preferred assassinations from a distance. I wasn't a fan of getting punched in the face and tossed into walls, but I suppose there's no getting out of this one. Visor walked over and tossed me a set of hand wraps. We might hit hard, but we're hitting pretty hard targets as well. Don't want any broken wrists. Spetsnaz soldiers hung back as the rest of us moved into the front. I already knew I was going to be hurting like hell by the end, so I prepared myself mentally. I'd been pummeled to near death a few times before. I couldn't really afford to lose any more brain cells. Visor tapped his wrist as the hour dwindled. Soon enough, we started hearing movement coming from the corridor up ahead. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and clenched my fists. I told myself that I was about to do something good. Something that would benefit humanity in the long run. For a moment, that made me feel better. That feeling faded quickly when I looked at what had appeared in front of us. A horde of unfathomable creatures had gathered at the dining hall entrance. Their dark gray bodies were centipede-like, with a sizable stinger at the end of their tails. Their torsos were thick and slimy, with 4 veiny, beefy arms attached to the sides. Their fists were the size of bowling balls. They had 2 circular mouths, lined with sharp teeth on either side of their face, with 3 sets of glowing, piercing eyes on top. Their hair were wild and spiky, almost like blades jutting out from the top of their heads. Of course, none of us knew how to react. I looked over, watching as Colt's expression turned blank. What the fuck? Before he could even finish the sentence, the creatures began to charge us, shrieking so loud it felt like my brain was shaking. Safe to say, I don't think this was part of the plan. Good grief, Colt muttered. Things just can't be simple for once, can they? The creatures were slow in their approach, but not as if they were sizing us up. There was something peculiar about the way that they moved. Not quite like predators hunting prey, more like a drone approaching its target. Their movements seemed calculated, methodical, almost robotic. You said no aliens, one of the Spetsnaz yelled out from the back. So what the hell is this? This doesn't change much, Colt said. These things are still here to kill you guys, and we're here to stop them. The creatures continued advancing at a steady pace. I looked back at our rifles, which were laid out on the tables. No matter how strong I'd become, the last thing I wanted to do was fight these things with my bare hands. Shit! I turned back around, seeing that the creatures had begun charging. I clenched my fists. It didn't really look like I had a choice. I stepped forward as one of them lunged at me. I could only comprehend just how massive the thing was once I got up close to it. Not only did it tower over me, its body was well over 10 feet long. I twisted my hips and punched its head. It clearly did some damage, but at the cost of my knuckles shattering. A few seconds into the fight, and I was already in deep shit. I jumped back due to the pain, but the creature just kept charging. It raised its stinger, and I was ill-prepared to block it. It stabbed me in my arm, not quite penetrating my skin. It still hurt like hell, though. I could see something dripping out of the tip as the creature pulled the stinger back, some kind of dark green fluid. I rushed forward and tried pulling the creature into a standing choke before it could strike again. Didn't work. The creature slammed me into the abdomen with one of its arms, sending me backwards and leaving me breathless. "Fuck this," I muttered. I pulled myself up and rushed over towards one of the rifles. I aimed the barrel at the creature's head and began spraying. Even though just about every bullet hit dead on, the abomination still wouldn't go down. Its head could snap back slightly with every impact, and as bits of its skin and flesh exploded, dark-colored blood spilled to the floor as it continued pressing forward, seemingly unbothered by the injuries. I cursed again and reloaded before once again emptying the entire magazine into its face. It finally dropped this time, even though it wasn't fully dead. It jerked and writhed around on the floor. I clutched the rifle like a bat and slammed it into the back of the creature's head until it broke. That finally managed to finish it off for good. The adrenaline rush was so intense, it took me a second to notice it. There was something sticking out of the creature's flesh. I approached the corpse cautiously in order to get a closer look. I wasn't seeing things. Buried in the bone, cartilage, and tissue appeared to be wires, as if it was some sort of robot. Before I could inspect any further, another of the things lunged at me. I leapt back before gauging the situation around me. I spotted Colt fighting off two of the creatures at once, barehanded. There were 4 of them, lying limp around him. The guy was a monster himself. However, the rest of us weren't doing so well. Luke was trying his hardest not to get pummeled, while Armin was thrashing on the floor, trying not to be strangled. Strangulation. I wouldn't have expected these kinds of creatures to resort to something like that. Everybody else was facing a similar struggle. The only one holding their own was Colt. There was also somebody missing. Somebody I couldn't immediately spot. "Looking for something?" a voice said from behind me. I turned around to see Visor with a wicked grin on his face. "Visor, what the hell?" He interrupted by punching me hard in the throat. I began gasping for air as I fell to my knees. I looked up at him. He casually strolled away before walking up to Luke and unceremoniously breaking his arm. I tried standing up, but I ended up getting knocked back down by one of the creatures. I could hardly fight back as it wrapped its massive hands around my throat, simultaneously drilling its stinger into my leg, and this time it managed to break my skin. What it was trying to do wasn't a mystery. He was injecting this narcotic agent into my veins. To my surprise, it let go of my throat before I passed out completely. In retrospect, it made sense. These things were probably programmed to move on after the injection was completed. I sat up, I struggled to fuel air into my lungs. I looked around, watching as Visor effortlessly subdued the rest of our team. At the same time, the creature seemed to be completely ignoring him. Eventually, he made his way over to Colt, who still had his hands full with the multiple creatures. Colt screamed something at him, but I couldn't hear what he said. Visor responded by punching him in the face. Compared to the rest of us, it took him a little longer to take down Colt, but he still managed to do it without breaking so much as a sweat. It also didn't help that Colt was being tag-teamed by the creatures. With our team entirely down for the count, the creatures turned their attention towards the Spetsnaz, who had been watching the entire ordeal at the back. Now these guys were done for, I thought to myself. Fighting these creatures was a hellish experience, even with the serum. I could only imagine facing them in a normal state. It'd be a complete and utter slaughter. However, the Spetsnaz didn't seem worried at all. There was no fear in their expressions. Their faces were stone, as if a gang of mere hooligans were standing in front of them. Some raised their rifles, some grabbed their knives. Despite the impossible odds, they were still going to fight. The lead Spetsnaz stepped forward, before shouting something in Russian. Then they charged. As expected, it was a short, brutal struggle. I looked back at Visor. He appeared to be recording the entire thing, keeping only the Russians and the creatures in frame. Even though he only managed to capture a few seconds of footage at most, he took off right after. I suppose he got what he came for. I was shocked just how horribly the plan had gone. The Spetsnaz we were supposed to protect were all dead. Half of our team was knocked out cold, while the rest were injured. Not only that, Visor had apparently set everything up. A mole amongst moles. I could only imagine what was waiting for us next. The creatures had become stationary after finishing off the Russians. The details we all started to align. These things were just machines made to look like biological entities. They were fake aliens. I could see Colt slowly pulling himself up as blood leaked from his nose in a large gash on his forehead. "Where'd Visor go?" he said, spitting out blood. "He took off," I responded. "After recording everything." Colt's eyes turned wide before he suddenly bolted up. "That fucker can't get away," he said before sprinting back down the corridor like a bat out of hell. Everybody else was too roughed up to follow after him. But I wasn't. My right fist was broken, but that was about the extent of my problems. I started running after Visor as well. We made it out of the underground complex and back into the woods, where we could see a trail of fresh footprints on the snow. We tracked his trail about 5 minutes before finally catching up to him. He didn't seem too alarmed. In fact, it looked like he was just taking a casual stroll through the woods. Colt wasn't about to waste time asking any questions. Immediately charging at him like a bull, he tried taking Visor down, but was met with an abrupt knee to the face instead. I tried running at Visor as well, but I was knocked down before I could even lift my arms. It happened so quick, I'm not even sure what kind of move he pulled on me. In any case, I wasn't getting back up. I felt like my liver had just burst open. Colt wasn't done yet, though. With blood pouring from his mouth, nose, and eyes, he lifted himself up and started advancing toward Visor again. What happened next was just a one-sided beatdown. Colt must have thrown over 50 strikes, only a couple landing. Even the first ones that hit didn't seem to faze Visor in the slightest. He just shrugged everything off. Visor grabbed by the arm and delivered a rib-shattering kick, which brought Colt back down to the ground. We were both done for. Visor just looked at both of us and sighed. "Commendable effort," he said. "You boys aren't giving up on the mission. I can respect it." He leered over Colt. "But that also means it'd be dumb as fuck if I let you live." Visor grabbed Colt by the throat and squeezed. You're a rat-sucking bastard," Colt rasped out as the air slowly vacated his lungs. Yeah, Visor said, nodding. "It is what it is." I wanted to pummel Visor right then and there with every fiber of my being, but I couldn't. I could only crawl towards them at a futile pace. "I'll get you next, buddy, don't you worry," he said, grinning smugly at me. Colt stopped struggling after about 10 seconds. "There you go," Visor said almost in a whisper. "Night-night." Then he turned his attention to me. Now, if you told me 10 years ago this is how I'd die, I'd probably laugh in your face. If you told me the same thing 1 year ago, well, that's a different story. At the end of the day, I had nobody to blame but myself. I never could go down the normal route. No matter how much the people in my life pleaded, no matter how much worry I caused them, I only ever wanted to live for myself. I still don't think there's anything wrong with that. I suppose things could have been different. Could have been better. Your thoughts race when death is lurking right in front of you. Though I don't know if time was slowing down in my mind or if Visor was just taking his sweet time walking over. But I had a lot of time to think, a lot of time to regret. I sighed and I closed my eyes. I never really believed in reincarnation, but at that moment, I tried. It's just that I thought that I'd do better in my next life. I was waiting for him to kill me. And I kept waiting. but it wasn't happening. Eventually, I opened my eyes. Visor was standing only a few feet away from me, but his attention was focused elsewhere. I followed his gaze and spotted Luke standing at the edge of a clearing behind us. One of his arms was completely mangled thanks to Visor. He was bleeding profusely from a wound on his cheek. But despite that, he was standing there holding a pistol. Visor looked perplexed at the sight. I can't say I would have reacted differently. I couldn't comprehend what Luke was trying to do. "Didn't I kick your ass?" Visor said. "And now you're here pointing your pea shooter at me? I mean, I get it. Just as dedicated as the next guy. This is getting ridiculous." Luke just grinned. "I didn't want to waste this on you. Kinda glad that I get to." He fired the weapon, hitting Visor in the chest, but not with a normal bullet. The projectile was some kind of liquid-filled capsule, staining Visor's clothes and neck as it exploded upon impact. Visor looked at Luke, the smugness in his expression replaced with genuine concern. "What the fuck was that?" he asked. "Try kicking my ass now, you motherfucker," Luke responded. Visor's face contorted into a grimace. He stepped forward, but he couldn't even make it a few yards before collapsing. He went into a violent coughing fit as blood burst from his mouth. "God damn," he muttered. "My father once said that no matter what you have," Luke began, "it'd still be taken away in a heartbeat. I never doubted him." He looked at me, tossing me a pair of handcuffs. "Hey, do me a favor and restrain him here for me," Luke said as his injured arm dangled gruesomely to the side. "I'm a bit fucked up right now. No rush, though. He's not going anywhere." I looked at Visor, who was still writhing and coughing out blood on the ground. I looked over at Colt, still lying limp beside him. I was seconds away from sharing the same fate. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd really been strangled lifeless, and this was just some posthumous hallucination. But I don't think the dead could feel as pissed off as I did at that moment. "What happens next?" I asked Luke. He shook his head. "I don't know for sure, but I think things are about to start moving. Quick." "What the hell did you do to me?" Visor shrieked, still retching up mouthfuls of blood. His skin was becoming redder by the moment. "Fuck you," Luke responded. "You don't get to ask any goddamn questions." "Here's what we're gonna do," he continued. "You give us the information we want." He held up a vial of clear liquid. "And I'll give you the antidote." "Antidote to what?" Visor asked. "What do you think?" Visor responded. "You have about 10 minutes before your skin starts bubbling up like a fucking pizza in an oven. It's gonna look real nasty. Say goodbye to that handsome face." Visor let out a pained chuckle. "Nice bluff. I don't feel shit. I'll survive whatever the hell this is." I had to commend him on his dedication to the lie. His face was going beet red, and his eyes looked about ready to pop from his skull. Luke sighed. "We can wait then. See if your tone changes in the next few minutes." And I couldn't tell you what the hell that Luke had blasted him with, but I'm sure as hell glad none of that splashed onto me. The amount of pain that Visor was experiencing seemed to multiply every second that passed. After only a minute, he began screaming his lungs out, as if his head were being crushed under 10,000 tons. "You don't feel anything, huh?" Luke said coldly. "What the hell was in that bullet?" I asked him. He just shook his head at me. "I'll tell you later." He walked over towards Visor and knelt down beside him. "I bet you're going through hell right now, aren't you? Well, brace yourself, because this ain't even the peak of it." "New York!" Visor muttered out. Luke grinned. "Now we're getting somewhere." If I fail to deliver the footage, the next attack's gonna be in New York." "All right," Luke responded. "So how do we stop it?" Visor let out an excruciating groan. He was starting to turn crimson. The sewers, he continued. "They'll come out of the sewers." "Which area?" Lower Manhattan." "When?" Two days from now. Around noon." Luke nodded before standing back up. "New York, huh? Couldn't have picked a more generic place?" That's everything I know, Visor said, gritting his teeth through every word. Give me the fucking antidote! One more question, Luke said. Is Kane gonna be there himself? Visor responded with a strenuous-looking nod. I think... There's a fucking antidote, come on! Oh, this? This? Luke said, holding up the vial instead of handing it over. He opened it up himself before pouring it down his throat. Visor's expression dropped. This is vodka, Luke continued. There is no antidote. Luke walked off, leaving Visor to scream in agony by himself. I'd be lying if I said that the whole sequence wasn't a bit jarring for me. I just had to stand there for a moment watching him. It was like a train wreck. I couldn't take my eyes off him. But as big of a piece of shit as Visor was, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. It's just a bit. 2 days, Luke muttered to himself. Now a lot of time. Hell, we don't know if he's telling the truth. So that's where we're going? Manhattan? I asked. Luke nodded, although his face seemed to be stuck in a permanent grimace. We gained the intel at the price of 2 valuable assets. 2 of them? I asked. Colt, I understand. What was the other? The bullet I shot Visor with, Luke responded. That was supposed to be for Kane. It's the only thing that's capable of taking him down. I nearly choked on my own saliva when he said that. Are you fucking kidding me? The words came out of my mouth almost instinctively. Why the hell would you waste it on him then? Relax, Luke responded. We had 2. That's 1 bullet left. We just need to have perfect aim. No big deal. The hell was in that bullet? He was silent at my question before letting out a brief chuckle. You know what? I don't actually know. Before he could give me a further explanation, the rest of our team made our way to the clearing, all looking pretty roughed up. Armin came through first, his eyes widening upon seeing Colt's body. God damn, he muttered. His eyes then moved over to Visor, still convulsing on the ground, his dismay turning into anger as he stared at Luke. Don't tell me you used it, Armin said, his eyes fixed on Luke in a death stare. The hell were you thinking? He was filming the entire attack, Luke responded, his voice remaining calm. Could you imagine what would have happened if that footage made it to anybody significant? Armin shook his head, visibly pissed off. Doesn't change the fact that you just took the biggest risk of all time. Did you get anything out of him at least? Luke nodded. Next attack's going to be in New York in 2 days. They're coming out of the sewers. Clearly Kane's going to be there as well. Armin took a moment to calm himself down. Well, let's see if your decision pays off. Or if you just fucked us permanently. Yeah, Luke said, starting to walk off. Quit being so dramatic. Let's get to the plane. Hang on, Armin called after him. What about your arm? Can you even move that thing? Without turning back, Luke used his good arm to flash the OK symbol at him. Armin shook his head and mumbled something before following after him. I began walking as well, but felt Visor grab my ankle after only a few steps. You don't understand, I heard him mutter. I didn't even look down. I just shook his hand off my leg and continued walking. Over the years, I learned that some things are better ignored. After trekking, retracing our steps through the grueling woods, we found the plane waiting for us. The pilot scanned our group, but didn't say anything about Colt's absence, although I could certainly tell that he noticed. Luke outlined our next steps on the flight back to New York. As expected, he was a bit haphazard, but we didn't have the luxury of planning ahead. Lower Manhattan was a relatively large place. We had a lot of ground to cover. Luke estimated that we'd be able to gather about 90 guys who were on our side in the short amount of time that we had. However, that also meant telegraphing our plan to Kane's entire faction, and that meant there was no going back. This was going to be our final stand. Taking out Kane was also going to be difficult, since we only had 1 bullet. Can't we just make some more of them? I asked. Why do we have to rely on 1? No, we can't, Luke responded. The only person capable of making these bullets is, well, Kane himself. Shit, wasn't expecting that. One of our moles actually managed to steal 5 of them from Kane's private lab. Luke continued. But then, things got messy. He was killed, we only managed to recover 2. And to be honest, I'm surprised Visor didn't know about it. Or else he wouldn't have realized I was bluffing about the antidote. I guess Kane keeps some things pretty close to his chest. And now we only have 1, Armin added, glaring at Luke. But does Kane know we have it? I asked. Luke nodded. That fact certainly doesn't help. He'll be expecting us to use it. With everything considered, it sounded like we were going to need a miracle to pull this off. Luke went to the list of our priorities in order of importance. 1. Don't let any of the fake aliens out of the sewers and into the city. And 2. Eliminate Kane. They were simple in concept, presumably tougher to execute. One aspect of the plan bothered me more than anything else. We were barely strong enough to take down a single creature by ourselves, I said. How the hell are we going to deal with an entire horde without Colt? Luke and Armin briefly glanced at one another. They almost seemed worried as they did so, as if an uncomfortable thought had just crossed both their minds simultaneously. We do have somebody stronger than Colt on our side. Probably even stronger than Visor, Luke said. Secret weapon, if you will. I squinted at both of them. So why the hell wasn't he here? Because he's fucking insane, Armin responded. He's not a secret weapon, he's a last resort. I'll call Valerie, Luke said, standing up. Have her wrangle him into New York. You do that, Armin said before looking over at me. Brace yourself. Once we get to New York, it's gonna be a shit show. When I was still in middle school, my math teacher once told me that I'd end up in the sewers if I kept phoning it in during class. I mean, I guess he was right. It was around 5 a.m. when we landed in Staten Island. The flight over was pretty quiet, with both Luke and Armin holding expressions that I knew all too well. It was the expression one might make when they weren't quite sure what was going to happen next. This is as much as I can help you, the pilot said, as he tried to hide the weary expression on his face. We nodded at him as he prepared to take off. He didn't seem enthusiastic about sticking around to see what would happen next. I couldn't blame him for that. Losing a friend and Colt couldn't feel too good either. We only had to wait for about 10 minutes to be picked up. 4 vehicles, all different makes and models, pulled up. With a taller blonde woman coming out of the lead car, her face seemed to be frozen in a perpetual grimace as she walked up to Luke. What the hell have you done? She said through gritted teeth, looking just about ready to break Luke's other arm on the spot. I thought you knew how to follow simple instructions. Yeah? Luke responded, holding a similar expression to hers. And I thought you knew how to recruit people. Your guy, Visor, was a fucking mole, Valerie. What the hell are you talking about? She said. Are you sure? Motherfucker turned on us, then started filming the attack, Luke continued. He also killed Colt, so yeah, I'm pretty fucking sure. Valerie's expression suddenly changed as she muttered something under her breath, and then she looked over at me. He's the new guy, right? I nodded in response. And Colt's the only one dead on our side? She asked. Yeah, Luke responded. Good, she said. I guess we broke even. Time to go to Manhattan. She turned, heading back towards the vehicle. I looked over at Luke, who just smirked. Wouldn't get on her bad side. We drove from Staten Island deep into Manhattan, before finally arriving at an unassuming-looking Chinese restaurant. Let me guess, he said as we pulled up. Another secret CIA base? Don't be so surprised, Luke said as he hopped out. At that point, I suppose nothing should have surprised me at all. We passed through the main dining area before descending into the basement to find about 30 armed soldiers and agents getting geared up. Is this everybody? Luke asked. Just about, Valerie responded. Except for Gustafson. He's in the freezer. Had a hell of a time getting him over. Gustafson? Is that the secret weapon you guys were talking about? I asked. Last resort, Armin confirmed. And yes, Marcus Gustafsson. He was a 6'7" Swedish-American SOG agent who opted to join the fight against Kane. As with everybody else, he was given a dose of the serum. However, his body's response to it was a bit different from everyone else's. His strength and speed were elevated to ludicrous levels, far surpassing even Colt's. Couple that with his massive frame, and he was essentially a human wrecking ball. Those boosts came with a drawback, though. In exchange for his physical prowess, his mind degenerated into something comparable to a primal beast. If anybody were to stand in front of him, they would get bulldozed regardless of who they were. There was only one feasible way to control him, and that was by putting him into freezing temperatures. When that happened, he was capable of retaining some degree of his old self, some degree of sanity. If we take him out, we'll have about 30 minutes until he loses control again, Valerie continued to explain. That means we'll have to work quick. That shouldn't be a problem, Luke responded. We only have to cover the entirety of Lower Manhattan sewer system. Just get it done, she said. You know how important this is. Don't fuck it up. Luke rolled his eyes. You don't need to tell me that, all right? Focus on yourself. She shot him a glare before walking away. Jesus, Luke muttered, shaking his head before turning to me. But she's right. This is important, he said. It's also very dangerous. You've survived so far, but I really couldn't tell you what's about to happen next. If you want to back out now, that's fine. Your choice. With all that said, you still coming with us? I already knew the question was nothing more than a polite gesture. I could tell I really didn't have an option at all. And if the world really was at stake here, then they needed all the help they could get. I nodded and shook his hand. In some strange way, it felt like my fate had been sealed from the very start regardless. We were headed into the sewers. We split up into 10 groups in order to cover more ground. I was with Luke and Armin, of course. The plan was simple in theory. We just had to locate where the robot aliens were being kept and eliminate them all. If we ran into Kane himself, then we needed to radio Valerie, lure him towards a rendezvous point, and shoot him with the last bullet. From there, we'd have to neutralize the remaining bots and organize a scrub of any trace of their existence. And if things became a little too overwhelming, we'd have to resort to unleashing Marcus. I didn't say it'd be easy, just straightforward. I could think of about 100 different ways this could go south, but nevertheless, this really was our one and only shot. As hard as I tried to mentally prepare myself for our descent into the murky tunnels, I still couldn't stop myself from gagging as we waded through the calf-deep river of who knows what. Luke and Armin weren't even trying to suppress their amusement at my discomfort. Is this funny? I asked. Does it smell good to you guys or something? We've been through a lot worse, Armin responded. This really ain't much in comparison. You want to hear some stories to pass the time while we search? Luke asked. I didn't take him up on the offer. I had to focus on not throwing up instead. After about 15 minutes of walking, we came across one of the creatures, which caused me to flinch as my light attached to my rifle illuminated it. Thankful it was dead. It also seemed to be different from the ones we encountered in Russia, more gruesome in appearance. It was about twice the size, so big that it nearly blocked the entire tunnel. It was also covered in what appeared to be boils. Large, pulsing spheres that were fighting for space across its torso. Luke walked forward cautiously before quickly turning away. His hand clamped over his nose. Jesus, he muttered. Smells like death. Armin grabbed a knife off his belt and stepped forward. What are you doing? I asked him. I just want to know what we're dealing with, he responded. He chucked the blade at one of the boils, causing it to burst open. I couldn't stop myself from puking a little in my mouth after seeing what came out. These things began crawling out. There had to be dozens of them, all about the size of a large rat. They looked like spiders at first, but as they crawled closer to me, it became evident that they were just smaller versions of the creature. It looked like something straight out of hell itself. Fuck me, Luke said. Weren't these things supposed to be robots? He looked around before stomping on one of the creatures and completely pulverizing it. I don't see any wires here, he continued. I looked back at the creature. watching as the boils started to bulge and thrash as if the monstrosities within were getting ready to hatch at any moment. Biotechnology, Armin said. A real taboo subject. It makes sense, though. Why build robots from scratch when you could just breed the organic matter and modify them at maturation? You seem to know quite a bit about the topic. But still, he continued, I suppose this complicates things. Since the creatures were blocking most of the tunnels and we didn't want to risk accidentally popping another one out, we took a different route for searching. As noon began closing in, we still hadn't managed to find anything else of note. I could tell that Luke and Armin were getting worried. Although they were doing a good job of hiding it, my mind began drifting, conjuring up images of these creatures running amok in Manhattan. How would people react? How the hell would the world respond? My thoughts suddenly halted when I started feeling something below me. It was rumbling, coming from beneath our feet. It didn't take a genius to realize what that meant. The creatures weren't being held in the sewer tunnels. They were being held beneath them. And it seemed as if they were already on the move. We were 10 minutes away from noon, so we didn't exactly have the time to propose an extensive plan. We simply had to act. Armin pulled out something that looked like a large block of C4 before planting it in the water. He detonated it, causing the water to flow into the hole that had been created. I could see another tunnel beneath. As the rumbling continued to increase in intensity, Armin tossed a flashbang and we hopped down. There were no soldiers waiting for us. But what we found there was startling regardless. It wasn't just another sewer tunnel, it was a hallway. One that looked like it could have been plucked out of any office building. We were all in disbelief as we walked forward, staring at the inexplicable sight around us. We began hearing footsteps coming from the corridor behind us only moments later. It was no mystery to what the source was. We made a hell of a lot of noise coming down. I raised my rifle just as a group of soldiers turned the corner. I opened fire, but none of them even flinched in response. Of course. They were all on the serum. I glanced down at my watch, 5 minutes before noon, and from the sound of it, an entire army of robots were marching beneath us. Let's go, Armin yelled. I turned around, watching as him and Luke began running. We scrambled through corridor after corridor, trying feverishly to find another way down while evading the soldiers simultaneously. The pressure started mounting as they began converging on us at seemingly every corner. As hard as we looked, there didn't seem to be a way for us to go. Not that we had much time to begin with. We soon found ourselves in the middle of an intersecting corridor, being boxed in by soldiers in every direction. They weren't shooting at us, or even running. Instead, they approached us calmly, almost as if they were robots themselves, and I suppose they didn't need to rush. We were all completely trapped. Fuck it, I heard Armin say. I looked over at him, watching as he pulled another block of C4. What the hell are you doing? Luke asked. If it works once, it'll work again, Armin continued. Brace yourselves. He planted the explosive right beneath our feet and detonated it. I could feel a surging pain overwhelming my entire lower body as the floor broke beneath us, causing us to fall deeper into the strange underground complex. Not sure how far we fell. It had to be at least a few dozen feet, possibly a few more. My head continued to ring as I tried to regain my bearings, looking around to see that we'd fallen into some sort of lab, and the more I looked, the more bizarre things became. The place was massive, almost too big for me to comprehend how it could have been built. There were rows upon rows of glass chambers, filled with all matters of grotesque creatures. I looked over at Luke, who also seemed completely dumbstruck by the sight. Armin was fidgeting with the radio, likely trying to call Valerie. Can't reach her, he said. I guess these won't work this far below ground. Course they don't, Luke grumbled. We have to find a way out of here. Armin shook his head. No, we have to finish the mission. We need to find and kill Kane. What are you talking about? Luke responded, clearly floored at the thought of it. The invasion's already started. Does that change anything? Armin responded. We still have a job to do. Come on, man, Luke said. Let's find a way out of here. Then we can regroup with the rest and come up with a better plan. There's nothing we can do here. Armin seemed to hesitate for a moment. His expression showed signs of apprehension. But in the end, Luke's words didn't deter him. He ran off by himself before either of us could say anything. Fucking hell, Luke muttered as he grabbed my arm. Let's go. Are we gonna go after him? I responded. Do we have the time? He responded. The guy's made up his mind. We have our own asses to save. As wrong as it felt leaving him behind like that, I decided to follow Luke. I suppose he was right. This mission was over. Still, the chances of us making it back to the surface didn't seem so high. Also, what would be waiting for us once we got up there? Noon had already come and passed. I could only imagine the chaos that was already transpiring. As we ran through the seemingly endless lab, I could hear footsteps chasing us once again. We finally reached what seemed to be the end, only to be met with another adjacent corridor. This one lined with rows of metal doors and panels of glass in between. I glanced into a few of them as we ran, seeing people in heavy medical gear wielding massive tools, staining the walls with blood of unknown specimens. The whole operation clearly went deeper than Luke or I or anybody on the outside could have imagined. We ended up running into another group of soldiers who were storming right towards us from the other end. This time there was no way of evading them. We were stuck in the middle of the corridor with nowhere else to run and no more C4 left to detonate. Even if there was another level below us, I doubted that I wanted to see what there was. We just had to face them head on. I ran forward in an attempt to force myself through, but was immediately pushed back, the impact leaving me gasping for air. As I scrambled on the ground, I could feel an immense pressure wrapping around my neck, almost as if I was being strangled by a python. I didn't stay conscious for much longer after that. When I finally came to, I found myself sitting on the floor, my arms and legs bound by some kind of metal restraint. I tried struggling, but they wouldn't budge. I looked around, seeing just about everybody else in there with me. Luke, Armin, Valerie, and a larger, extremely beat-up man who I could only assume was Marcus. Even our last resort had been captured. We really never stood a chance, did we? I made eye contact with Luke, then Armin. I knew that we were all thinking the same thing. This was nothing short of a complete and utter disaster. The rest of the room was pretty much empty, which was strange, since it was apparently large enough to hold upwards of 50 people. I had to wonder how much time and effort went into building a place like this. I could see a few soldiers guarding the exits, but no security beyond that. I couldn't understand why they hadn't just killed us. They must have just sat there in silence for about 15 minutes before somebody else finally walked in. He was a man of average height, an extremely muscular build. Everybody else seemed to recognize him as I stared with wide eyes and flared nostrils. As I would soon come to find out, this was Kane, the man behind all the madness. He gave off a bizarre energy as he walked towards us with his carefree movements and impossible-to-read expression. I wasn't sure if I was just going crazy, but I knew that I recognized him somehow, but I couldn't quite place where those memories may have stemmed from. "Why don't you just kill us, Kane?" Valerie said. "There's no chance in hell we're joining you." "Because that wouldn't help anybody," he said, stopping a few feet away from us. "You never gave me a chance to explain my intentions." "That's something that you have to earn," Armin spoke up, his voice saturated with rage. "And you lost that when you started murdering people." Kane glanced over at him before shaking his head. They wouldn't listen. I tried reaching out to them, and they refused to hear me out. But I'm a patient man. I'm willing to give everybody here another chance. I'll explain why all of this is necessary. He paused for a moment before clearing his throat. The first thing you need to know is, I'm not from this time. I'm not from a time where everything was all right, where anything made any sense. I came from a time of strife, from a place of absolute horror. I'm from the future. No, come on! Everybody shouted. Fuck off! You expect us to believe something like that? Kane didn't flinch at the outburst. He just continued speaking. It's a substantial assertion. I understand that, he said. One that requires proof behind it. He reached into his pocket, taking out a small rectangular device that almost looked like a pistol magazine. He pointed the device at the ground before firing off some sort of a projectile. It looked like a metal circle quickly expanding upwards and forming what almost looked like a large oval-shaped mirror. But I have proof with me, he said. I'll show you the future. The glassy substance within the mirror began morphing, before we all found ourselves looking at an unfathomable scene. At that point, I had to wonder if I'd been hallucinating the whole thing. Perhaps this was one big visceral fever dream. From CIA conspiracies to alien robots to some alleged time traveler that I vaguely recognized, none of it could possibly be real. But if that was the case, then why wasn't I waking up? I continued staring at whatever was unfolding in front of me. What was supposed to be our future? It looked like Earth, but just barely. It wasn't even apocalyptic in the traditional sense. It almost looked like another world entirely. There was a forest, but the trees seemed to be much larger than they should have been. As I looked closer, I realized that the wood was covered in veins, and the leaves, they had teeth biting at these bird-like creatures that flew a bit too close. The mountains in the back had thick black smoke billowing out from the peaks. The gargantuan entity lurked behind them, its colossal tendrils wrapping around the base. The grotesque creatures larger than airplanes populated the neon skies of the lake below seemed to bubble with the activity of obscured monstrosities. It may be hard to accept, but it's the truth. This is a recording of our future, Kane said. I was sent back with one purpose and one purpose only: to prevent this at any cost. We need a united population, he continued. The way the world is right now, with its superpowers at odds and countries locked in perpetual conflict, it won't cut it. And it's only going to get worse from here. We won't be ready for the real invasion. We need a unifying event to save us. I could have guessed that this is where he was going with it. You can hate what I've done. It's justified. I understand. But just know that all of my efforts have been for the greater good. I wasn't quite sure what to think. Kane spoke with an air of confidence that could have been denied. His words had conviction behind them, his tone unfaltering the entire way through. The evidence he was presenting was also undeniably significant. Was he right? We were on track for a future as horrific as the one that he was showing us. I mean, could it be helped if we joined him? As convincing as it seemed to be, there was one thing that I couldn't shake, a feeling deep within my psyche that told me all of this was wrong. The man standing in front of us was absolutely not to be trusted. Where had I recognized him from? On top of everything else, this was starting to drive me crazy. Kane began walking around, intently scanning our group, looking for a shift in attitude. I know it feels like I've betrayed you all, and I'm sorry for that, he said. But there are some things that simply need to be done. Soon enough, he made his way over to me and stopped. Had he recognized me first? A new recruit, he said, looking down at me. I suppose I don't have the same kind of history with you. I'm sure everything your comrades has told you about me came from a noble place. But I'm just trying to save lives as we know it, for future generations. What do you think? Are you with me? I looked up at him, staring into his eyes directly for the first time, and that's when I figured out. I realized where I'd recognized him from. It was unmistakable. One of his eyes had likely been injured in the past, leaving nothing but a milky white behind. The sight of it triggered a memory so repressed in the back of my mind that I hadn't thought about it in years. I nodded. Yeah, I'll join you. Kane got down on a knee, getting eye level with me. You're sure? He asked. This is important, I responded. I want to fight for the future. He smiled. I could tell he hadn't recognized me at all. Thank you, my friend, he said. Soon enough, you'll know that your decision was the right one. "What the hell are you doing?" I heard Armin say. "This is a trap! He's not telling you the truth!" I ignored him, continuing to look forward instead. Kane went ahead and loosened my restraints before holding his hand out to me. I accepted and he pulled me up to my feet, patting me on the back. "Your descendants will thank you," he said. I stepped past him, walking towards the strange mirror world. "Can I ask you a question?" I said. "Of course," Kane replied, walking over to me. "Why can't you remember me?" Before his expression could even register the confusion, I grabbed him by the neck and sent us both crashing into the mirror. We fell through, hitting the dirt as we did so. As I expected, he wasn't showing us a recording of the future at all. This was something else entirely. As we scrambled on the ground, I saw the device fly out of his pocket, landing on the ground a few feet away. This also ended up closing the portal entirely. "No!" Kane screamed. "What the hell have you done?" I leapt up and tried to grab the device, but was pulled back down and slammed by Kane. He really was strong, but I couldn't let him win. We continued to fight, although it gradually devolved into one-sided beatdowns. I may have bitten off more than I was able to chew with this guy. He ended up cracking me across the jaw with a vicious elbow, which caused me to black out for just a moment. I fell to the ground, stars now littering my vision. Kane stood over me, his face twisted into a spiteful grimace. "Who the fuck are you?" he asked. I really couldn't believe that he didn't remember. What was one of the most disturbing moments in my entire life must have been par for the course for him. My encounter with Kane happened early in my career, back when I was a little bit more optimistic about my future. I was in France, where I had been paid for a contract and was riding high on my emotions. I just needed a few more paydays and I'd be good, then I could move on to bigger and better things. I was walking through Paris at night, enjoying the crisp breeze and a nice, expensive cigar. At one point, I turned into a completely empty street, which is where I saw her. A young girl, maybe in her early 20s, walking by herself. Something that wouldn't have been a cause for concern on its own, but the details made it quite alarming. She seemed to be wearing nothing but a torn hospital gown, and her movements were frantic, almost as if she wasn't quite sure where she was going. She soon spotted me and began running over. I backed up just a bit, unsure of what to expect from something like this. Perhaps she posed no physical threat to me, but any and all risk was better off avoided. In any case, I eased up as she got closer. She looked to be in extreme distress. She began speaking to me, her words coming out in a rapid and jumbled mess. My French wasn't great to begin with, so trying to decipher what she was saying proved to be quite the task. However, I could make out a few key phrases. "Help me, please. Save my brother." She grabbed my arm and began pulling me, trying to get me to follow her. I was hesitant at first, but ultimately relented. I knew that this could end horribly for me, but the idea of being the hero gave me hope of some kind of catharsis. Maybe I could wash away all the morally ambiguous things I'd done with one act of altruism. I really did think that this is how the world worked back then. Eventually, she led me to what must have been the most decrepit building in the darkest corner of Paris. A place that looked so uninviting, even the most daring of ghost hunters would have avoided it. "The basement," she said, looking up at me with teary eyes and a petrified expression. She really must have experienced something horrifying in there. "He's in the basement, please hurry." And against my better judgment, I went in. The place looked like it must have been a store at one point, but I couldn't have been too sure. The smell of mold lingered in the dusty air as I walked, hand gripping my pistol as I searched for a door leading down. It didn't take me long to find it, and I began traversing down the rickety wooden steps, trying to make sure that I wouldn't get clocked in the back of the head with an axe once I got down. I ended up in a hallway, which felt strange since it didn't seem to line up with the rest of the building's aesthetics. This place looked newer, relatively well-maintained, as if it was actually being used for something. I got to the end of the passage where a locked door was waiting for me. I went ahead and knocked it down, revealing an even stranger sight beyond. Another hallway, this time with metal doors, and windows on either side. At this point, I began tensing up. It felt like I was seeing something that I really wasn't supposed to. Most of the rooms were empty, evident from the fact that their lights were off and I couldn't see anything inside. There was only one that wasn't. Light poured into the hallway from one window near the end. I remember my arms shaking as I got within a few steps, feeling the pressure in the air getting heavier every time I inched forward, and then I looked inside. Through the window, I could see a bloody operating table with a young boy strapped to it. His stomach was open. Like a few of his organs had been removed and replaced with some sort of metallic counterpart. And then the man who was operating on him came into view. His face had been blurred out in my memory for so long, but I could see him clearly now. He was standing in front of me, both in my mind and in real life. He saw me looking at him, gave me a sinister grin, one that was equal parts smug and sadistic. It was as if me stumbling upon his operation wouldn't be a problem for him in the slightest. I could feel his arms raising instinctively, my mind screaming at me to shoot him and kill him. I could tell that I was looking at an extremely dangerous individual. I fired off 3 or 4 bullets through the glass, all of them hitting the man square in the forehead, but instead of dropping to the ground, his grin just grew wider. It almost looked inhuman, as if there wasn't actually a man there at all, just a primal force of destruction. I remember backing up slowly, my limbs completely stiff from the shock. The man opened the door and stepped out, approaching me in a way that was disturbingly nonchalant. I tried getting up, I tried running. I didn't make it too far. I blacked out after only a few steps, and I woke up some indeterminable amount of time later, face first in the grass and dirt. My head was pounding as I got up, finding myself standing in a park near the hotel that I was staying at. My phone and wallet were still in my pocket, so I checked the time to see that it was 9 a.m. the next day. For the longest time, I couldn't tell if what I experienced was real or not. Eventually, I settled on the latter. I thought it was better to just delude myself than consider the alternative. However, I remember one thing very clearly from that night. I knew exactly where the building was, the one that the girl had led me to. I almost didn't want to do it, but I knew that I had to. I needed to go back to that building and see what was really there. So that's what I did. I ventured all the way back down those streets, feeling my unease mounting every time I got closer. I could almost see the girl running in front of me again. If all of this was real, then where was she now? Eventually, I made my way back to that spot where the building was, half expecting it to not be there at all. But that wasn't the case. It was still there, now sealed off by police tape. The cops who had been guarding the place eyed me curiously as I walked past. I almost considered asking them what had happened in there, but I decided it was best not to. Over the years, I gradually managed to purge that memory from my system. I convinced myself that there was absolutely no chance something like that had actually happened. It was better off being forgotten. Looks like I've been wrong the entire time. But it's also how I knew that Kane wasn't telling the truth. I'll ask again. Who the fuck are you? He spat at me. As Kane continued approaching me, I was at a loss for what to do. The device was still on the ground behind him, but getting it was a secondary concern. I needed to prevent him from snapping my neck first. Fighting him directly was obviously out of the question, so I needed a more creative approach. But what? What was I supposed to do here? As I tried backing away from him, I felt a sharp pain hit one of my arms. I looked down, seeing that some sort of insect had burrowed its way up from the dirt and was now gnawing away at my skin. And not long after, I began feeling something shifting below me. The insect that had bit me, a worm-like creature, began growing longer and longer as it rose up from beneath. After only a few seconds, it became taller than an adult male, showing no signs of slowing down either. And then the ground itself began rising up. It wasn't just some insect, it was attached to something much larger, and we were right on its back. Dozens of worm-like appendages began shooting out of the ground as the creature decided to stand up, understandably pissed off at our presence. It began moving, causing both Kane and I to stumble as it did so. On top of that, the creature's appendages began lunging at us, gradually chipping away bits of our flesh. I stood up, took my knife out, and tried to intercept some of them with my blade before they could bite me further, which proved to be a task more difficult than I could manage. I heard a deep growling from below, feeling the vibrations at my feet simultaneously. This thing must have been bigger than the White House. There was enough room on its back to play a few rounds of golf. I looked over at Kane, who seemed to be handling the appendages easier than I was. I shouldn't have been surprised. He was probably familiar with the creatures here. One of them wrapped around my ankle before nearly dragging me off its back entirely. I managed to cut it off before that could happen. I looked down at what was beneath, seeing much larger appendages lurking below, their mouths wide open and lined with knife-like teeth, presumably waiting to snatch us up as we fell. I scrambled away, a shiver overwhelming my body at the thought of what was happening. However, I also realized something in that moment. In order to beat Kane, I just needed to use my surroundings. It's easier said than done, but that was my only chance. I got back up, looking him dead in the eyes, and ran towards him, ignoring the pain from the relentless bites in the process. He saw me coming and threw me to the side, pushing me closer to the edge of the back as he did so. However, that's exactly what I'd expect him to do. Kane was already prepared to charge back at me. I stood as if I was getting ready to meet his charge with a rush of my own. He moved first. As I waited for a few seconds before moving myself, I could see the rage in his eyes as he got closer to me. He wasn't thinking rationally anymore. Otherwise, he likely would have fallen into the trap that I'd set for him. If we collided head-on, then there would be no doubt that I would be the one who'd be bodied off, so I wasn't going to do that. Before we could come in contact, I quickly moved to the side, putting my foot out just far enough for him to trip over it. He was moving so fast that he could barely react in time. I watched as his body flew forward, stumbling downwards and out of view. I didn't let myself breathe until I heard him screaming. That must have been the deepest breath that I'd taken in years. But I wasn't done yet. I began looking around me, searching for his portal device. I knew that I wasn't going to get out of here without it. I spotted it at the other end of the creature's back, getting dangerously close to falling off with each step that it took. I ran over to it, managing to grab it just before that could happen. I looked over the device and saw an array of buttons and switches, none of which I could possibly comprehend the function of. However, there was one button at the center that was clearly larger and more distinguished from the rest of them. Before I pressed it, my mind began running down a list of things that might happen. There was no guarantee that this would take me back. That this would even take me anywhere better. I looked up, taking in the apocalyptic hellscape around me. In some ways, it was quite beautiful. I'd never seen a sky with the kind of color before. It was almost mesmerizing. Nevertheless, I sure as hell knew that I couldn't stay. I pointed the device down before pressing the button, and to my relief, another mirror-like portal began materializing. As I prepared to move through it, the creature suddenly stopped moving. It fell to the ground with a large thud, causing me to land on my ass. All the appendages stopped bothering me as well. Was it dead? I thought to myself. I could hear something coming from behind me, something that sounded like labored breathing. I turned around, coming face to face with one of the most horrific sights I could have seen at that moment. It was Kane, covered in bloody bite marks. There had been a large chunk taken out of one of his arms, while a portion of his skull had been exposed to the top. He began limping towards me, his expression so demented that I couldn't even meet his eye with my own without feeling complete despair. You thought that would be the end of me, he said in a raspy growl. I won't stop. I'll never stop. I stopped thinking about what might be on the other side. Turning my back on him and jumping through the portal, I could feel wind biting at my battered skin as I did so. I found myself standing in freezing drizzle along with a rocky beach shore. I quickly pressed the button again, closing the portal behind me, just as Kane was getting ready to make it through as well. It was finally over. Despite the excruciating pain that I was in, my lips curled into a grin and I began to scream into the wind. This was my moment of catharsis. I looked at my surroundings, seeing no signs of any creature around. It did seem like I was on Earth again. I began walking, trying to find my way back to some sort of civilization. However, my body had pretty much reached its limits. I passed out before I could make it anywhere. Somebody found me before I could freeze to death. I woke up in a small wooden cabin, basking in the warmth of a space heater placed next to the bed. My wounds had all been bandaged up, and there was a nice savory scent lingering in the air, which caused my mouth to water incessantly. I wasn't quite sure how long it'd been since my last meal. I sat up and I looked around, spotting a woman, probably in her early 30s, cooking over a stove just a few feet away from me. She saw me looking over, smiled. "How good," she said. "You've woken. Are you hungry?" She had an extremely strong accent, which I recognized as Icelandic. I guess that's where I'd ended up. Even though I tried controlling myself, my manners were pretty much non-existent at that point. I slurped down 5 bowls of that stew without a care in the world. The woman didn't seem to mind. She didn't ask many questions either. I could appreciate that. "Oh," she said as I put the bowl up to my mouth and scraped the last pieces of fish into my mouth. "This is yours, isn't it? I found it lying a few feet away from you." She was holding the portal device. Nearly forgotten about it. I thanked her and I put it into the drawer beside the bed. It's been a few days since she found me. Even though she said I could stay here for as long as I'd like, I don't plan on bothering her like that. Using her laptop, I've done some research. I've concluded that this is not the same Earth that I left behind. It's similar, but it's not identical. A few key details have all but confirmed that. Back in my world, Kane has already started the invasion, and even though he's dead, I'm pretty sure he wasn't running the whole operation alone. And hell, I can't even be sure that he's dead. I'm not going to take the easy way out and stay here for the rest of my life. After all, I still have a mission to accomplish. But that might take some time, though. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I really appreciate it, and anytime you guys give me a subscribe or a follow or a like or a comment or literally just a watch, I can't thank you enough for it because you're the reason I keep making episodes and you guys are the reason that I love horror as much as I do. We're in the middle of summer, and I'm from Texas, which means that it's a great time for iced tea. And you know who makes iced tea? My wife. My wife sells tea. My wife sells tea on etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocle tea. And if you want to get the Mr. Creepypasta special, you can order a dark and stormy night and specifically request a dabbing sticker that you only get if you ask for it. And as always, I want to give a very special thanks to all of my patrons at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, because you guys are the reasons I get to keep my lights on in the house and get wonderful little treats for my cats and everything like that. And also the reason why we keep getting special custom series just for the channel. So a special thanks to Jacob Shaffer, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Bryon Arce, Ken Lando Higuchi, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Bardo Hawk 764, TheBananaMafia 1, Melancholy Corpse, Hollow Zero, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Katie Birch, Sashi Suzaku, Caden the Spooky Boy, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Faye Lockett, Miss Exandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Eurogore, Suji Campbell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Stricken, Ozarine Fox, Robert White, Andres Garcia, Snails Brennan, Legit Quad Feed, James Bruce, Chris Lovins, Freddy Krueger, Tynan, Justin Johnson, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, James Lowe, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Ells, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Someone You Love, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, Corey Kenshin, and Peaceful Buddha. That's right guys, at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, you could join this amazing list of people's names I mispronounce and the list of Patreons down there in the description. But of course, none of that is ever required. I just appreciate you guys subscribing and watching and honestly being here. So, to all of you, sweet dreams.